Story 1. I was backing up the photos on my phone today, and I found some which I took the day of the incident. I gave it some thought and decided why not share it on here. Being anonymous and all that, maybe this can even serve as a PSA of sorts. Always trust your gut feeling. Last year, I was living by myself at the time, before my partner and I moved in together. For some background, my partner used to work very hectic shifts. Sometimes he finished at 5 p.m., sometimes 6 p.m., sometimes 9 p.m., and he would let me know if he'd be dropping by that day, though he usually wouldn't be able to give me a time, but at least I knew he'd be coming by. It was around 8 p.m. and I was upstairs in the bedroom, working on an embroidery project. I had my AirPods in, so wasn't too aware of what was going on around me. I remember feeling the bed rattle, since my bedroom was right above the front door, so whenever someone closed the door, seeing as it was very old and heavy, it always rattled my bed frame. This would usually indicate my partner has arrived. I didn't immediately go downstairs to greet him as I really wanted to finish off the piece of embroidery I was working on. It was about 5 minutes before I took out my AirPods and proceeded to make my way out of my bedroom and onto the stair landing. I was about to call out for him when I realized he didn't leave his work jacket or work boots in the entry. He knew full well I don't like shoes, especially work boots, all over my carpeted floors. I assumed I must have imagined feeling the bed shake. I went back into my bedroom and was about to put my AirPods back in when I very distinctly heard a big crash come from downstairs. It sounded like something very heavy was dropped. I freaked out and called my boyfriend's name down from my bedroom's doorway. Got no reply, but I sure as hell started hearing heavy footsteps pacing towards the entryway. My gut feeling was that something here was very wrong. I turned and grabbed my phone from the bed and bolted to the bathroom, which was the only room in the house with a lock. I called the police as I started hearing those same heavy footsteps make their way up the stairs. I've never, ever been scared of those creaking sounds coming from the stairs, but it was different then. At the time, it felt as if I've never heard a scarier sound. As I was on the phone to the police, the only thing I could tell the lady on the phone was my address. Over and over again. I was more focused on how I was going to get out of there. I wasn't going to wait and see what would happen, or who this person was, so I flung my small bathroom window and feet first slid down the lower roof. My adrenaline was so high, I had to momentarily put my phone into my bra as I had no pockets, and needed both my hands. I just remember hearing the police dispatcher keep asking over and over if I'm okay, and what was happening. I didn't even have time to tell her what I was doing. It felt as though my body had gone on autopilot. Once on the bottom roof, I lowered myself again, now onto the pavement, as I fell right onto my knees, no less. I got right up and bolted it down the street. It was completely dark with it being mid-October. The dispatcher was still on the phone when I finally got on it again, and I told her, whilst running, that there was someone in my home and how I just jumped out the window to get away. I ran for what felt like forever until the lady on the phone said to focus on finding a shop where I could go into and wait for the police. I remembered my boyfriend and told the lady I needed to call him. I made it to a Tesco Express by then, and though she wanted to keep me on the phone, I said I needed to make sure my partner didn't go into my home and potentially risk running into the other person. I got into contact with my partner, who had just finished work. It was around 9 p.m. by then, and was driving to my house. Told him what happened, and he instead started heading towards the shop I was outside of. Felt such relief when he got here. I remember taking a picture of my scratched up knees when I got into the car. For some reason, I got very fixated on them. My partner called the police back for me as the shock started setting in then, and he let them know he was with me. It took some time before the police finally arrived at my home. I was told my front door was left wide open, and in the living room the side table had been knocked over. My home wasn't ransacked, but it did look as though someone booked it out of there relatively quickly. Upstairs, my bathroom door was kicked in so hard that the door frame itself was indented in, though nothing was stolen. Once they looked over the place, I was called and told I could return. My call-out ambulance crew was called and they looked me over. They sorted out my knees and did some sort of assessment to see if I was okay mentally, and told me to go and see my GP the next morning about my knees. Reports and statements were written up, and I stayed with my boyfriend for 2 weeks after that. I had to hire someone to fix my door frame along with having a security system installed, as I don't think I'd be able to return without it. We never found out who this man was. My neighbors had cameras, and all we ever figured out about this person was that he was a man who just walked right into my home like it was his. Zero hesitation. My front door was unlocked as I was expecting my partner to arrive soon. I live in a very safe village, and leaving the door unlocked was a common occurrence, though I've never left it unlocked since. I still live here, with my partner and 2 dogs now. The man has never been back, though we have quite obvious cameras around the property, along with visible security company signage. This was easily the most terrifying experience I've had in my life. It's so hard to describe or tell to people. It's like I wasn't in control of my own body when this was happening. Autopilot went on, and all I knew was I needed to get out of there. Story 2. The old cemetery in my village looks pretty creepy. You know, like most cemeteries. Dark, abandoned, poor. Makes you want to run away the moment you lay eyes on it. So, it wasn't a surprise when one of the girls dared me to go there after midnight while we were drinking and smoking at her place. I didn't want to look like a loser, and plus I was kind of crushing on her, so I said yes. The thing was that I was supposed to enter the cemetery from one side, and the rest of the gang would wait for me at the other end. The girl I had a crush on decided to be the one who would let me go in on my way. She was pretty cute and nice. However, she had this thing for scary stories and local legends. I tried my best to seem cool and chill while entering the cemetery, so when she stopped me and looked at me with her huge eyes, I kind of liked it. Maybe it meant that she cared about me. Hey, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, you know? But a dare's a dare. Plus, I'm not that scared of it, you know? I tried to give her my best smile, but I could still notice how worried she was. As I was about to leave, she stopped me once again. Hey, just in case, take this with you. She had a little Shinto charm in her hand. I felt a mixture of emotions. The fact that she cared enough to give me a gift like this was very exciting, but on the other hand, this is a Christian cemetery. A Shinto charm? It's known that Japanese travelers would go here often back in the day, when there was nothing but woods here, and some of them would get lost and die of hunger. So just in case, I think this will protect you. If it weren't for the alcohol and the fact that I really liked this girl, I would decline this whole dare for sure, but the way she handed me the Shinto charm, and the way she looked at me with admiration, I knew this was my chance to get her to like me, so I just grabbed the charm and went for it. The cemetery wasn't big for itself, but it was pretty dark because of the woods. Thanks to the shiny moon and stars, I was still able to see the main road. Felt actually pretty peaceful. The sound of the leaves, soft wind, pleasant ringing. That's when it hit me. Ringing? Shouldn't the church be empty now? But the thing was, the ringing did not sound like it was a bell. I've heard how bells ring. This was something different. It sounded like the sounds bells make at the Buddhist temple. And for some reason, that's when I remembered what she said about the Japanese travelers. I turned around to the sound of the bell, and that's when I froze in place. There stood a figure, towering over me, 15 times bigger. A huge shadow of a skeleton. It was hard to make out the details. All I could see was the shadow thanks to the moon and the stars. I couldn't even run away. All I could do was stand there as it lifted its giant arms, slowly getting closer to my head. And the ringing got louder and louder. And when it was about to touch me, it stopped, and that's when I was able to get out of the trance. I turned around and ran like hell. I could still hear the ringing in my ears. I ran like hell, not even looking back. As I got out of the cemetery, my friend stood there. I didn't know what to do. Wasn't even able to catch my breath. "Hey, you look like you just saw a ghost." It was a giant." "What?" My friends just looked at me as I was spouting nonsense. Only her, the girl I had a crush on, mumbled, "It was a Gashadokuro." Now others looked at her with wide eyes. I could barely catch my breath. Ringing. When Gashadokuro appears, you hear ringing first. These are giant titans made of bones of the soldiers and travelers who have died of starvation. They roam after midnight, reap off the heads of the solo travelers, and drink their blood. What? You're drunk. No way that's true. My friend started to laugh it off. Noticing that both of us were drunk, I didn't say anything. Although I already felt sober after the encounter. As everyone went for the exit, she approached me and whispered in my ear in a soft voice, "But don't you worry. Shinto charms are always keeping them away." It did feel nice that she cared for me, but if the charms didn't work, or if I had lost it or not taken it from her at all, would that mean that Gashadokuro would drain me of my blood alive? Can I trust this girl from now on? Does this mean she will protect me or be the one who will get me in situations like this? I really don't know. But I really do like her. Story 3. My childhood was full of monsters. Most of these monsters were the adults, but not exclusively. I quickly learned that other children were unaware of these monsters. The other kids didn't notice that our grade 1 teacher, Mrs. DeRosa, was a monster. She had long, spider-webbed fingers that turned into claws when she became angry. Her hair was of no actual color, and her eyes were two dark holes in the middle of her ginormous head. Plus, she was always hungry. Don't get me started on the principal. My parents thought I was crazy, and maybe I was. The doctors certainly thought so. Turns out, I wasn't. It didn't take long before I learned to keep my mouth shut on this matter. Instead, I learned to cope. At least my parents weren't monsters. I would have known, right? At age 13, I became obsessed with computer programming and dove headfirst into it. Now, as an adult, I'm an IT guy. Need help sorting out your pesky computer problems? Call me. I'm an expert. Actually, to be honest, I'm not bragging or anything, but over the years, I've proven to be the best in the biz, which is why I wasn't totally shocked when I received a request to visit Washington, D.C. last month to clean up some important government files. 2 desktops and a pile of laptops. They wouldn't let me work remotely. They wanted to watch over me, which they did. They're still watching over me. What I've found on those laptops has been keeping me up at night. This is why I'm telling you this, but even after what I've discovered, I'm not disclosing any names. I may see monsters, but I'm not an idiot. Before I continue, let me try and explain what I mean by monster. Lately, interest in these so-called lizard people has been showing up on certain online forums. Their claims aren't quite right, but not quite wrong either. I understand that certain people recognize these creatures for what they truly are. Monsters, but are confused by what they're seeing. So they use lizard people as a blanket term. I'll have to accept that, but that's not what I see. I see creatures who feed off the fear of humans, who lurk in shadows and hold high positions in firms. Some are janitors at schools. Monsters like little boys and girls, you know. Some people claim that the world is run by Satanists. I'm not claiming that either. I have no skin in this game. I've avoided politics and religion my entire life, and at this point, all I want to do is settle down. Find myself a life partner. Finding a soulmate sure would be nice. And raise a family. Wow, I must be getting old. Anyway, monsters do exist. They always have, and not just in this world. There are others. These monsters are actual beings just like you and me, but they're not of this earth. Not of this dimension. In fact, and they live much longer lives than humans, which gives them a hefty advantage over us. Did I mention how they hate humans with all their hearts? Especially little children? Okay, so back to why I'm telling you this. Like I said, I got the call to fix some laptops and such for these fat cats in Washington, D.C. They offer me more money than I know what to do with and pay up front. I gladly accept. After a week of screening, testing, profiling, and indoctrination, I was led into a dark and dingy room that smelled of stale bread. I was surrounded by a group of unsmiling businesswomen and men in sharp suits. I don't trust these people. Most of them are monsters. Whether or not they realize I am onto them remains unclear. But I am starting to suspect they know. Monsters must never be trusted. I got started on their laptops first, which, as I suspected, were in total disarray. How anyone could let their computers become this bogged down is beyond me. Yet sadly, I've seen worse. Plenty worse. Before I begin working my magic, I did something I don't normally do. Something unethical. I made a copy of everything on their hard drives, easily getting around their novelty security measures. Please note, although most IT guys do this regularly, if you've ever hired one, chances are they know your dirty secrets. I've only ever done this once before. It was on my girlfriend's computer, and all I found was a backlog of Disney classics. I spent most of last week going through what they were hiding on those computers and laptops. What I've discovered is a national threat. Hell, it's a global threat. Maybe worse. I saw videos of government doctors and agents in white lab coats doing ungodly experiments on pregnant women. Most, but not all of them, were monsters. In fact, I believe the human doctors were unaware of the creatures they were collaborating with. After spending 4 nights glued to my screen, watching these experiments, I've concluded this. Monsters are breeding. They take pregnant women and somehow inject their monster DNA into the fetus. Meanwhile, the mother goes home and remembers nothing unusual or out of the ordinary. The baby is born a monster. There's more. 3 nights ago, I discovered a database of all the monsters and their date of births and addresses and occupations and politics, which means the Secret Service is aware of these monsters, and they've been harvesting and monitoring them all along. What I've learned is beyond terrifying. Once a monster is born into this world, its offspring becomes a monster as well, even if the other parent is normal, which is usually the case. These experiments date back to March 6th, 1964. Gotta go. They're at my back door. I'm starting to wish I hadn't done what I'd done. Should never have peeked inside those computers. Some things are better off not knowing, just like some people should never be trusted. Especially monsters. Better yet, I should not have taken the job. Although it's starting to look like I had no choice. These people mean business. I'm getting for real scared now. Bad vibes everywhere. They are watching me. I see their reflection in my screen. A cold, blank stare that could chill a block of ice. Something inside me starting to change. I'm feeling sick, but I took a COVID test before they let me in. This is different. My fingers are getting webbed. My ability to type is getting bad. I don't know why. I'll be back tomorrow to conclude my work. Not much time. I'm fighting this. Bastards. Monsters everywhere. Okay. So I'm back and something is wrong. Really, really wrong. I can't see my reflection now. I'm a monster. It's in me now. I'm infected. Help us. They are here. Save yourself. Story 4. When I was a freshman in high school, I spent almost every lunch break at the St. Clair Cemetery a few minutes from the school grounds. Me and two of my friends would walk down there each day, winding around the trails and talking. We appreciated the peace and quiet that came with this place, as it was almost always devoid of people. When we visited the cemetery, we entered through a large metal gate from the sidewalk. The path wound around the entire property, leading around the plots, down a steep hill, and back to the gates. This place was full of headstones belonging to all kinds of the deceased. Young, old, rich, poor, and especially dead soldiers. Every time we passed through, we walked by a whole section filled with white crosses, some of them bearing Canadian flags. Just past the war heroes was a fork in the path leading back toward the edge of the cemetery, next to the road, and a path through the middle of the graveyard. Usually we just walked through the middle of the property, headed back down the hill and out through the gates again. Overlooking the whole area was St. Clair's Church, which was just some standard fare Catholic church with a defunct electronic sign out front. Every day we would set out in light jackets, or just t-shirts, laughing and talking and walking. It was just me and my friend Lloyd and Daniel. Lloyd was a deceptively athletic kid who could run fast and far. He looked skinny, but he got himself on every sports team he could. He was the most argumentative of us, constantly challenging and prodding and jokingly insulting. There was no winning an argument against him. But for some reason, I would always try. Daniel was meek, quiet, and pretty smart. When he talked, he knew what he was talking about, but he rarely challenged anyone or spoke his mind. I liked talking to him the most because he liked to avoid conflict. He liked to get along. But we all enjoyed each other's company. At least enough to band together each day, so we walked. From the very beginning of that fall, we spent the hour talking about whatever nonsense we were into, and pointing out funny names on headstones. On one October day with a blanket of clouds tucked over the sky, I sat out there with just my dog. Walked through those big metal gates, mutt in tow, and I began walking the path in silence. I made it all but 20 feet before that silence was broken by a man standing by the curb next to the paved path. I had not noticed him until he spoke, so I was startled and he seemed to smile at that. "What do you think, huh?" He grinned, leaning on someone's resting place. "What?" I asked softly, not fully enunciating the word. "About God. Do you think this is his plan?" I was standing there, stopped in my tracks, wondering what the man in the red flannel was going on about. "Oh, I don't know. What do you mean?" "This kid here." I patted the gravestone he had been supporting himself with. "He's 16 years old. Or was." He corrected himself. "Oh, yeah." I dumbfoundedly forced out. "All around here, I mean. It's just 4-year-olds and 8-year-olds and teenagers like you." "Yeah, that's too bad." I said in an attempt to actually add to the conversation. "Yeah, you get it. You know. You understand all this bullshit, don't you? You're not one of them, huh?" I nervously smiled and started walking again, giving him a little nod as I passed. "You have a good walk now," I called as I walked a little faster down the path. I went through the usual route, only this time I was a little freaked out by the encounter. It didn't really do anything too alarming, but talking about dead kids in an empty graveyard was a bizarre thing to do. As I made my way through the place, I noticed him meandering through the surrounding plots. He seemed to be checking out the graves, looking at the gifts people had left and reading names. I walked through the middle path, glancing over at him, but he didn't seem to be paying any attention to me. By the time I reached the final stretch leading to the gate, I felt a sense of relief. He seemed pretty harmless, but I was still unsettled to be alone in a cemetery with him. When I got home, which was only a few minutes away, I asked my dad if he had ever seen a weird guy hanging around St. Clair's. Keep in mind that my dad often walked the dog there as well, sometimes with me and sometimes alone. The only reason for this is that we lived in a very boring urban center, and St. Clair Cemetery is one of the only quiet, empty places nearby. He said that he hadn't seen anything, but he immediately followed up with a question. He asked me what exactly I had seen. I told him about the interaction, saying that it was awkward and strange. He reminded me of the vandalism that had been going on in that area. Someone had smashed up multiple headstones, probably with a sledgehammer, damaging them significantly. He said that, if anything, that guy could have been the vandal. I had previously known about the vandalism, but it hadn't crossed my mind until he brought it up. Now considering myself some sort of fledgling investigator, I went to my room and searched up St. Clair vandalism. I found nothing about damaged headstones, but I found something else entirely. Suspect in St. Clair Evangelical Church fire arrested. Pictured in this article was a tall, bald man looking up at a security camera. Apparently this guy had set a minor fire in the church, causing some damage to property inside the building. There was no major structural damage, and the place was entirely empty. He had committed this crime in the dead of night, when there was nobody to witness the arson. However, A security camera caught him very clearly, and he was promptly arrested by the days following the fire. This had happened 4 years before I found the article, so it was safe to assume he was a free man at the time. He had only caused a few $1,000s worth of damage, and his problems seemed entirely mental. The Canadian justice system got him psychiatric help, fined him, and spat him out onto the street. I studied the picture of the suspect. I didn't get the best look at the graveyard guy, but I knew he was bald just like the suspect. He seemed shorter in person, and significantly older than the picture, but I couldn't be sure either way. I didn't really know if it was the same guy, but I was desperately hoping it was. This would add such rich folklore to the cemetery, and it would be fun to tell the guys about it. Watch out at St. Clair's. There's a psycho on the loose, vandalizing the place and setting fires left and right. The next day, at lunch, I elected to stay inside with Daniel and Lloyd, going instead to the library. I told them about my encounter, telling them that it was probably this arsonist who set fire to the church, and that he was rambling on about God and dead kids. I showed them the picture of the suspect, whose name was Francis Lavoie. By the way, terrifying, I know. Searching his full name, which was French sounding, we found a video on some third-rate video sharing platform. Other results included 1 or 2 articles about the fire, a Francis Lavoie Facebook page, and some irrelevant nonsense. The video looked like an original upload by the man, made in the summer of 2012. It was almost 40 minutes long. The Gospel According to Francis. So we watched it, and it was actually pretty boring. It opened up with some foreign-sounding music, an iMovie-esque title card, and some narration over stock images. There's a story about a man looking out into the world, watching all the corruption, pain, and suffering of his fellow man. He looks to the heavens and he asks, God, why don't you do anything? God looked down at the man and answered, I did do something. I made you. Francis went on to talk about his experiences traveling the world, how he has interacted with every culture, and his journey as a man. He frequently mentioned how the Catholic Church brainwashes its members, including him as a child, and how they prevent people from achieving free will. He seemed bitter about religion being imposed on him as a child, but he presented his case in a calm way. Obviously, we were bored to tears by all the talk about churches and answering the questions of the universe and so on. We watched a few minutes, paused it, and immediately started talking about what this guy must be up to. Lloyd posited that he must be out for more revenge against the church, desecrating graves and patrolling the grounds. I played along with this idea because it was fun. Daniel shrugged and occasionally added something, but he seemed to think we were exaggerating the reality of the situation, which we probably were, but we had fun with that. The next day, we were walking through the cemetery again, looking around for signs of Francis or whoever I had ran into. We found nothing that day, but we remained vigilant, hoping something would happen. We kept coming back, poking around the cemetery, looking at damaged gravestones and peering into the church. I guess we fancied ourselves a poor man's Hardy Boys, looking for Francis the arsonist on the grounds of St. Clair's. One day we sat on the grass just under the top of the hill by the church, talking and relaxing. We were having a good time, just laughing and enjoying the late October weather in our jackets, until something crept up behind us. That something was a black Jeep, which was moving just slow enough to make almost no noise. save for the gentle crackling of pebbles and worn pavement against the tires. My stomach, and I assume all of our stomachs, dropped into the abyss the moment we realized there was a Jeep creeping up over the hill. My heart began pounding out of my chest, and we all rose from our seats on the grass. Without a word, we all began booking it down the steep hill, our legs making incredibly long strides, as if we were flying down the incline. The Jeep continued to creep down the hill, but we occupied the grass, as we didn't want to be in its path. I was afraid I might stumble and fall or trip on something, as I was a little clumsy. Luckily, I remained on my feet, and adrenaline carried me all the way to the bottom of the hill. Lloyd was way ahead of me, and he had taken the lead, running in a straight path to a fence. Up the path to our right was the gate, but Lloyd decided to take the express route to the sidewalk over the fence. Daniel followed him, and so did I. Lloyd was over the fence in a flash, and Daniel didn't take much longer. By the time we were on the other side, the Jeep had sided up along the path, directly in line with us. It was probably 40 feet away, and it just sat there as I started to climb the fence. I anticipated the sound of a door opening, of screaming, of menacing threats, and gnashing teeth. I stepped on a root, pushing myself up and swinging my body on top of the fence. I looked over at the Jeep, seeing the man inside just staring in my direction. As my heart beat in my throat, I tried to swing my other leg over the fence, to freedom. To my blood-chilling horror, a moment later I was still not on the other side. Instead, I had gotten my jeans caught on an especially sharp, pokey piece of chain link fence that jutted out from the top. I tried to thread the fabric over the metal, hopefully freeing myself, but I couldn't do it fast enough. Fuck. Help me get off this shit. I pleaded. My heartbeat continued to assault my rib cage, and it felt like my blood was pumping at an impossible rate. As I began ripping my jeans, trying to tear them away from the clutches of the fence, I heard the driver bang on the outside of the door loudly, as if warning me. I continued ripping, ruining my pants, and trying not to cry out of frustration. The metal dug into my leg, causing a stinging pain and making it harder to free myself. Then my worst fears came true. I heard the door open. I refused to look, instead focusing entirely on not dying in a cemetery. Daniel grabbed me, pulling me to the other side with a loud rip that did a number on my jeans. Bloody leg, ripped jeans and all, I ran with Daniel and Lloyd back to school, to safety. When we finally sat down, panting and gasping for air, trying to reset our heart rates, we all knew one thing. We were not done with the graveyard guy. For the next few days, all we could talk about was our narrow escape from the St. Clair stalker. We built our own little folklore around him, who he had now decided was definitely Francis Lavoie, and we speculated on what he might be doing. Lloyd said that he had probably been watching us each day we visited the cemetery. I entertained this idea, but Daniel mostly stayed out of it. He said that if it really was the arsonist, he was probably unhinged and meddling with him would be unwise. However, he told me it probably wasn't Francis, and that it could have just been a groundskeeper. The weekend came and went, and it was almost Halloween. We had planned on visiting St. Clair after school that Monday so we could look around and determine the facts. I wasn't sure what we were really expecting, but it was mostly just a way of messing around and hyping up the narrative we had created. I walked down the hill from my house to the cemetery that day, which was the 29th of the month. My house was a few blocks from the school, and it sat at the top of a hill that led down towards the graveyard. I left around 6 o'clock, and the evening was creeping up on me slowly but surely. Once again, clouds smothered the sky above me, and the weather was just cold enough to force me into my jacket. My friends were waiting for me by the gate. Along the beginning of the path, bare trees hung over our heads as we trekked onto our stomping grounds. Lloyd flashed a smile at us as we entered, pulling a small object from his pocket. "Don't be afraid. I brought my knife," he said semi-sarcastically. I scoffed, sort of amused. "What are you gonna do? If someone pops out at us, are you going to actually physically stab them?" Lloyd shrugged and slid it back into his pocket. "Maybe." "I don't think that's legal in Canada, dude," interjected Daniel as his eyes locked onto the path in front of him. "Well, neither is stalking, or whatever else Francis gets up to," Lloyd reasoned. We trudged up the hill, examining cracked headstones and the flowers laid in front of them. At one point, I saw a coyote slip between the graves, prowling for some neighborhood cat or squirrel or whatever they ate. Turning to the center of the graveyard, we made our way down the path, deeper into the heart of the grim property, occasionally ducking under hanging tree branches. At some point, we stopped, near the back of the cemetery, where a fence closed us off from a parking lot. Maybe 300 feet to our left was the building nobody knew the purpose of. Maybe it was a shed or a small garage. And a black Jeep. A black Jeep. Oh boy. We kept our eyes on it, all excitedly watching the familiar vehicle as it sat outside of the small structure. We hung around for a few more minutes, waiting from a comfortable distance for something to happen. And then it did. The door to the structure swung open and we all watched as the man stepped out holding a toolbox. We were both giddy and nervous, honestly surprised that he was here at all. As we shushed each other, we watched him walk over to the Jeep, open the door, and just stand there. "We should go," said Daniel, a little too loud. The man slowly turned his head, spotting us immediately as we stood in the middle of the path. He turned his entire body to us and waved both arms, shouting something that I didn't fully understand. What I could easily tell, though, was that he wanted to know what the hell we were doing out there. Lloyd, feeling cocky in our little group, promptly stuck his middle finger up at him, holding it in the air defiantly. I told him to chill out, as that might not be a good idea, but he seemed to not care. The man quickly returned the gesture, and he appeared incredibly angry. I could tell he was raging just by the way he moved, which was stiff, jerky, and tense. A moment later, he clearly yelled, "Fucking assholes," and turned around to face the open car door. "Yo, let's go. Stop fucking around," I told Lloyd. Daniel clearly agreed. The man reached into the car, pulling out what was probably a wrench, and began walking in our direction. Lloyd flashed his knife, actually laughing as he did. Still not taking it as seriously as Daniel and I were. We started running in the direction of the gate as Lloyd yelled something at the man. A few seconds later, I heard Lloyd running right behind us, shoes pounding hard against the grass. "He's running! Holy shit!" he yelled. That was enough to make me run even faster, although Lloyd passed me after about 20 seconds. I didn't look back as we tore through the cemetery, shoes slapping against grass and pavement, breathing heavily and praying that he was slow. By the time we reached the gate, we looked back and the man was nowhere to be seen. Then and there, I decided this was enough fear for a lifetime, and that I would stop going back to investigating this strange man. We all walked back towards my house, still panting and recovering. At that point, it had gotten dark. I told them I was done, but Lloyd shrugged off the severity of the situation. He said that the guy wasn't really chasing us, and that he was probably afraid of actually fighting us, so we weren't really in danger. I felt a little foolish for looking out for him after all, and annoyed that Lloyd would be so flippant about it. As we neared the top of the hill, Lloyd flashed that smile again and brazenly asked me, "You want to go back?" I didn't. When I got home, Daniel and Lloyd went their separate ways, and I looked up Francis Lavoie again. I visited his Facebook page, which had nothing on it, aside from one post promoting the gospel according to Francis, years ago. I didn't know if he was active at all, but I decided to reach out to him in case he was. "Was that you in St. Clair's?" If he answered, I would apologize for Lloyd fucking with him, which would set my mind at ease. It was a long shot, but oh well. I didn't like the idea of an ex-con holding a grudge against me, especially if he lived in the neighborhood, which seemed likely. I sat on my bed and breathed a sigh of relief. I was alright, and so were Daniel and Lloyd. In my pocket, my phone buzzed, making me jump a little. I looked at the notification. Lloyd had texted me. "Checking out the shed. Will send pics." Jesus Christ. It was pretty dark by now, and he was opting to go back alone. I didn't understand the point, but sometimes Lloyd just did risky things to prove a point. A few minutes later, I got another text. "It's fine. Jeep is gone. No guy." He sent me a poorly lit image of the outside of the shed, and there was no Jeep there. I waited for the impending pictures of whatever was inside the shed, but they didn't come. By midnight, I just went to sleep, deciding that I would ask him about his experience in person. The next day, Daniel was at school, but Lloyd was not. We started getting pretty concerned, so we visited his house after school. His mom answered the door, and she was a wreck. No, she had not seen Lloyd, which intensified our fears that something had happened to him the previous night. He told her that he had gone to St. Clair Cemetery and that she should include that in a police report. That day, when I got home, I checked Facebook and was surprised to see that Francis Lavoie had responded. "No, who is this?" At that point, I fully realized that there was no way the man was Francis Lavoie. He was shorter, older, and didn't really resemble him beyond having no hair. Whoever we had run into was a completely random person. Likely a groundskeeper or something, like Daniel had said. I texted Daniel, asking him if he wanted to check the shed area for signs of Lloyd. It was still possible that he had been playing a prank on us, trying to convince us that something bad had happened, only to show up at a later time. Memories of him ditching me in the cemetery at night in the summer flashed through my head. I was left there in the darkness, calling out for him before inevitably running home by myself. Lloyd wasn't above a mean-spirited joke. Since it was broad daylight, Daniel said he would come to look around for a bit. We probably should have just gone to the police, but Lloyd had fooled me too many times to immediately default to that. Daniel arrived at the gates, and we made our way down the path, past the war heroes, around the back of the property, and up towards the shed. At first, nothing looked out of place. There was no Jeep, there were no people, and everything was quiet. I walked up to the shed, but Daniel hung back. I knocked on the door, not really expecting an answer. I paused in front of the door, still nervous to go inside, just building up the nerve to do it. I took a step back and looked at Daniel, who shrugged. Another moment passed, and I finally reached for the doorknob. I slowly turned it, still listening closely for any sounds. And then I heard something. Something inside there was a faint shuffling. I immediately recoiled, almost ready to run away, but I stopped. "Hello?" I called out to whatever was inside. I could hear my heartbeat as I waited for a response. A few seconds passed, and a muffled groan made its way to my ears. It sounded like someone walking up with a fever, weakly moaning in pain. "Lloyd?" asked Daniel. There was another groan. I opened the door and shined my phone's light inside, panning the weak light source across the small room. Directly in front of the door was a small metal chair, but the rest of the room was empty. I took a single step inside, and another groan startled me, as it came from my right. I shined the light towards the sound. There, in the corner of the shed, was Lloyd. Dried blood was matted in his hair, and he could barely hold his head up to look at me. "Holy shit, dude!" That's all I could say. I called the police, and paramedics came to lift him out of there. He had a severe head injury and had some significant brain damage. If he had been left there much longer, he likely would have died in that dark shed. Lloyd would have woke up in the hospital several days later, and within a week, we understood the entire story. When he entered the shed that night, he was ambushed and left for dead. The police connected the black Jeep to another incident that night, which took place about a half an hour from the cemetery. The Jeep was parked on the side of a busy road, and the driver threw himself in front of a passing truck. Inside the Jeep was a hard drive stocked with pictures and videos of the church and the surrounding property. Pictures had been taken through the windows. License plates of nearby cars were captured, and much more. Pictures of me, Daniel, and Lloyd had been taken from various points in the cemetery as we walked around. These pictures were given file names like Agent 1, Agent 2, and so on. From the files found on the hard drive, it was pieced together that the man harbored conspiracy theories about the churches in our city, believing that they were stalking and harassing him. Francis Lavoie was a recovered psychiatric patient who had really set fire to a different church of a similar name, about an hour away from our St. Clair's. To this day, Lloyd has difficulty speaking due to the damage caused to his brain. He's still being treated for recurring seizures and memory loss. Story 5. This was a while ago now, 2015-ish, and I still have PTSD from that time. I was sitting at the table eating dinner around 6 p.m. and had a funny feeling that something was behind me. So I turned around and seen what seemed to be like a mix of light and fog float past the couch in my living room. It was definitely shaped like a human, but I was quick to shake it off, thinking that I'm just seeing things because I didn't want to scare myself. So I turned back around to eat, and I see my sister that's sitting opposite the couch where I had just seen the apparition, making a funny face. She looks at me and says, "Did you see that?" And that's when I realized to myself, oh shit, I think I've seen a ghost. I quickly go outside to try to debunk the situation, whether or not it could be a car coming up the driveway, but there was nothing. The house I was living in at the time had a really long driveway with multiple residents, so I was hoping it might have been one of them, but no. Pretty much after we had seen that, the energy in the house changed and things started getting really weird. Like for one, I was left at home alone one night while my old man went to work for night shift. So I would go around the house and close all the doors and make sure they can't open. So I knew that if one is open, I know for sure it wasn't the wind or something like that, and I could always make sure the front door was unlocked. Well, I get a call from my old man telling me to unlock the door, and I say to him, It is. And he's saying to me, no, it's pretty locked because I'm outside. I walked towards the door in disbelief, thinking, I swear I left it unlocked. I'm so sure of it. And as I got to the door, I noticed the door to the garage was wide open, which was pretty much next to the front door. And the damn door was locked as well. From that night onwards, I was traumatized for what seemed like an eternity. I could no longer sleep without white noise in the background. I would have the fan on while playing a podcast of our local radio station. I lived like that for a few years. I'm not anywhere near as bad as I was now since I've moved, but now and again, I play their podcast to help me sleep. Never want to experience something like that ever again. I was skeptical about ghosts till that happened. Hauntings carried on for a few months until the house was blessed by a minister. Story 6. A running joke among the edgy teenagers at our middle school was that Ezekiel was going to shoot up the place one day. In retrospect, I'd gladly take that outcome. I knew him, or at least I knew him before he became what he is now. Every single law enforcement agency and three-letter organization has interviewed, questioned, probed, and accused me regarding Ezekiel. No good deed goes unpunished, I suppose. That good deed was being a friend to someone who had none. Middle school, the worst invention of humankind. 7th and 8th graders, or ages 12 to 14 years old, for those of you unfamiliar with the American school system. It's been a decade now. The story has finally faded from the demagogues and mavericks' agendas and no longer dominates the talk show and daytime news circuits. They made a lot of noise about mental health, bullying, and tighter school security. Fools. They do not understand that nothing could have prepared us for Ezekiel. Well, I'm not gonna lie. Had the school system actually taken a stand against bullying instead of actively aiding and abetting it, things may have turned out better. I do not believe Ezekiel was ever going to have a happy ending. But if he'd experienced less pain, more inclusion, and been given a reason to care about humanity, then he may have limited what he was able to do. Instead, humanity rejected Ezekiel. And so, Ezekiel rejected them and embraced it. Oh, side note. It is not a clown. We aren't sure what it is, but it's not like the Stephen King creature. As you may have guessed, this story more resembles Carrie. I should think of a better name. It does seem a bit cliché. I've got it. Reset. That works for me. If anyone needed a reset in their life, it was Ezekiel, and that's what it gave him. Ezekiel had nothing going for him. His home life was unhappy. He told me many times of that, and the one time I visited his house, I saw enough to confirm his stories. Ezekiel's father is the generic man-child bully who was far too immature to have a kid. Ezekiel had the misfortune of being weaker and smaller than his male parent, and so he became the dumping ground for all his father's insecurities and anger issues, of which there are a great many. This abusive relationship caused Ezekiel to become horribly introverted and awkward. This combined with his unusual appearance, very tall for his age and the palest kid in the school, caused him to, in turn, become the victim of extreme bullying at school as well as at home. Like I said, Ezekiel needed a reset, and that's exactly what he got. Humanity gave nothing to Ezekiel, so he gave his humanity to the reset. It was not worth feeling the fleeting joy life brings. Not to Ezekiel, who had never actually had anything to live for. I believe the day that Ezekiel surrendered to reset was the day that he died, metaphorically. Accepting such evil voluntarily into his neglected heart required the same despairing mindset as a suicidal person who carries out the deed. I think Ezekiel realized that he was never going to be free of his literal and figurative demons and gave himself to the darkness. I myself have seen into the darkness, dipped my toes into it even. There is a kind of perverse attraction to it, a sort of allure to abandoning one's humanity and entering the sweet embrace of absolute nihilism and misanthropy. I dipped my toe into those waters. Ezekiel dived head first into the deep end. That's where the reset found him. That's where it all went wrong. He's out there somewhere. I do not know what they are doing, if indeed they can be called separate entities any longer. Whatever they or it or reset is doing, I hope they are at peace. I do not condone what happened to that fateful day, but I want Ezekiel to know that I understand. Compassion, understanding, empathy. These are tools of the light. Vengeance, retribution, cruelty are the tools of the dark. I fight the darkness because I understand it and have seen what it can do. Ezekiel, if you are reading this and can still separate yourself from the reset, know that I haven't given up on you. I dedicated my life to helping people like you who needed only experience some goodness in life. I tried to be that goodness for you, but I failed. I won't fail you again. I've studied these entities like reset. Not the only one. You weren't the first to fall victim to their enticing offers. You won't be the last. Come to me, Ezekiel. You know the place. Be there on your birthday. I can help you. As for everyone else reading this, take heed. The next time you callously knock a kid's funnel cake out of his hand, you might be the final aggravation of someone on the edge. More broadly, however, look for those who are overlooked. Lift up those who are downtrodden. Bring a little more humanity into this world that is ever more dominated by the darkness. Or if you do, you might just prevent another Ezekiel from happening. I remember the event clearly. It's etched into my mind. I'd sent Ezekiel off to buy funnel cake. It was the end-of-year carnival held on the grassy PE yards behind the school. It was those funnel cakes that tipped over the edge for good. Of course, it was actually the lifetime of cruelty that did it, but in the moment, it was the funnel cakes that tipped the scale. I'd been aware that Ezekiel was communicating with something he called friend. This was odd because he didn't even call me friend. We were, of course, but neither of us were willing to admit it. At the time, I considered my friendship to be an act of charity. Ezekiel wouldn't admit it because, if he did, there would be an expectation that I spend more time with him, and he was so introverted that simply wasn't appealing to him. So we carried on our friendship at arm's length. Imagine my surprise then when he started calling someone or something friend. It was midway through the 8th grade when it began. It started with offhand, "My friend said," or "My friend thinks," comments. Due to the distant nature of our friendship, I didn't pursue the matter. At first, I was happy for him that he had found someone else. But as time wore on, I grew increasingly suspicious that his friend was fictional. He grew defensive and evasive whenever I asked to meet his new friend. He also grew bolder and began to lash out against his various abusers, a turn of events which I initially celebrated. He began to discuss the occult at length. I am ashamed to say that I encouraged him. We found a mutual interest in poring through books of demonology, hermeneutics, practical magic, and Western esotericism. All the while during that fateful year, his obsession with his friend grew ever more pronounced until I was genuinely concerned about his mental health. I believe Reset found a desperate, sad, lonely boy and made his home inside his empty heart. The fascination with the occult was a byproduct of that. I think Reset was learning all it could about how humans of our time and place perceive entities such as itself. Then, a month before the end of the year, Ezekiel began to discuss more violent things. And again, I am sorry to say I encouraged him. We were boys. Thought he was kidding around, talking like a serial killer ironically to amuse me, and to cope with his bullying and abuse, which was reaching a crescendo of intensity. I joked right alongside him about the grisly things we were going to do to his bullies. I blame myself for what happened after the funnel cakes. That is why I dedicated myself as I do to serving the light. I belong now to a group of learned men and women who pursue entities like Reset. We can help you, Ezekiel. Come to us. And once more, I speak to whoever may read this. The darkness is not worth it. Look for humanity. Look for the light. If the darkness tempts you, ignore it, because within it lie things like Reset who will use you. They never identified the remains of the jerk that knocked the funnel cake out of Ezekiel's hand. I gathered later he was the first to die. After Reset took control, Ezekiel sought him out to begin his vengeance. The bully's spontaneous act of cruelty provoked the final descent. I found Ezekiel in the bathroom, chanting something between choking sobs. He'd had enough. In that middle school bathroom stall, after losing his funnel cake, he surrendered control to Reset once and for all. I won't elaborate on what happened after because I really can't. They said that I would be spared. They threw me against the wall, and the next thing I remember is a lot of sirens and flashing lights, and then a lot of interviews with law enforcement. They covered up what happened as another of a very long list of mundane school massacres, but I've gathered more or less what happened. I've interviewed surviving witnesses and gathered that what they did at the carnival made Carrie's massacre look tame. They never caught him. They've vanished completely. I've kept my eye out for stories of death or mayhem matching the methods they used to rip their victims apart. Thankfully, there are none that I've discovered. That's why I hope they've found some degree of peace. But if Ezekiel wants to be free from Reset, he knows where to find me. Story 7. By now, I have accepted that I need to choose my veil. As a woman, I understand it is something I have to do. To pick my crown and wear it as a celebration of my life, but it still really, really sucks. It all started yesterday morning. I woke up early, had breakfast, and took an ungodly hot shower. I noticed this long, shallow scrape on my stomach, but thought nothing of it. I have tons of bruises and stuff. What can I say? I'm a klutz. After booting up my laptop, I started my work day. Yes, I have a job. Naturally, there's not much chance at me having a career, but it keeps me busy during the day. Around lunchtime, my fiancé dropped by with a picnic basket. He's sweet like that. We are getting married in about a week, so plenty of I's, do, dot, and T's to cross. Finally, the seating chart, what time to pick up the cake, the chain, the wedding bouquet. Did he still not want corsages? You know, the usual stuff. Lunch was lovely, and spending some time outside was wonderful. I'm sorry. I know how I sound. But I just adore how hard he tries. He's affectionate, attentive, and best of all, he knows how to make me laugh. He always wears his picture-perfect smile, the one that suits him so well. It's just great. Anyway, at the end of an otherwise uneventful afternoon, that scratch on my stomach was really starting to bother me. I lifted up my shirt and I knew it as soon as I saw it. My dad had prepared me for this as best as he could, but I wasn't really ready for it. I was shook. This is not how it works. I was supposed to get married. I was supposed to have children. Training kicked in and I started making the calls. My dad was about half an hour away. 15 minutes later, he and my fiancé were in my room. After careful examination, they confirmed my fears. And that is when my world truly came crashing down. Dad cried. I cried. And we had a moment. The mayor showed up for the assessment. In an attempt to slow it down, they covered my belly in a thick layer of mud-like substance. The smell. But even with that, I probably only have a good few days left. My fiancé informed me our engagement is now void. We're not married, which means he is not responsible for me. Fair enough, I suppose. He rushed out. After a quiet discussion with my dad. First time I saw him without his trademark smile. My dad went on to chastise me for not recognizing the signs earlier. But I had not learned anything from the time Nick's mother changed before her ceremony and escaped. I think I repressed that, but I remember. My dad had been away from home for days, helping, cleaning, and counseling all of the victims' families. When he finally came home, we spent hours trying to clean the dried blood from his work clothes and boots. Unsuccessfully, I must add. So, today I'm choosing my veil. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. Even though I haven't lived a full, traditional life, I am choosing a traditional covering. It will be a blusher, off-white with a lace trim, standard, fully reinforced headpiece with a replaceable vinyl liner in the back for easy cleaning. My dad insists on getting a more expensive one with a built-in bullet catcher. I can't argue with that man's logic. Usually, when a woman reaches her age of change, her husband prepares the shrine and invites friends and family. Her children, if they are old enough, sing a song about her life and put on a nice play. Her husband ends the ceremony by shooting her through the head. I still remember my mom's ceremony in a packed city hall. It was glorious. Mine will be at home. Just a small gathering. My dad built the shrine and invited the mayor, my boss, and my baby sister. He will bring her new fiancé. I'm glad it will be only familiar faces attending, even if one of those faces will be sporting a way too cheery smile for the occasion. When I put on my veil tomorrow, positioning the silver bullseye perfectly on my forehead, I will be asked to review my life. I loved, I hated, I cried, I enjoyed. I think I have lived. Sure, it sucks that I didn't live to see the next season of The Witcher, but I really am okay with all of this. Really. Tonight is my last night. I'll try to make the most of it. I might even sneak out for a walk. Please send me your courage for tomorrow. Story 8. It's nighttime and I'm so hungry. I hate feeling hungry. It makes me feel so out of control. Father always says that hunger is a sin, and if I was properly virtuous and poised, then I wouldn't feel it. I know, I know that it's sinful, but sometimes it gets so bad I sneak downstairs and get some food from the larder. Please don't tell anyone, diary. I know where they keep the good stuff in the larder, and I take little bits out of whatever is open until I'm full. They have chocolate and cookies and cakes and sweets. All the things that we aren't allowed. Us kids. I think the adults don't know that we know they're there because they keep them right at the back and I have to stand on a crate and stretch to get them. And I'm the tallest one now that Mariah's gone. She was always hungry too. Always complaining. And she was big. She didn't even need it. She got twice as much as the rest of us. She was older though. Older kids get more food. I'm the oldest now. I'm hungry again. We didn't have meat this week even though it's harvest season, and we were out in the fields all day and needed it for energy. When I was young and there were more of us, we used to get meat every single night, not just during harvest. And everyone was so happy, but now everyone's so angry and tense all the time. I'm going to sneak downstairs tonight. I have to work the fields again tomorrow, and I'm so hungry I won't be able to do anything. And then I'll get yelled at. I have to make sure that no one hears me. Not even the other kids, because they don't like me anymore now that I'm the oldest and I get more food than them. What I do is wait until I hear their breathing change, and then I slip out of bed and move my pillow so it looks like I'm still in there sleeping. Then I carry my shoes in my hand and walk to the door. I have to walk past all of the beds when I do it because my bed is at the very end. The adults' dormitory is downstairs in the sleeping quarters, and sometimes I've gotten halfway down the stairs and then I hear them talking in low voices, and when that happens, I have to turn back because I don't want them to catch me, but it was quiet tonight. The door to the outside is at the bottom of the stairs, and it's left open most nights. It's never been locked while I've tried to sneak out, but Maria told me that when she used to sneak out every so often, the door was locked and all the adults were out. I try to open the door really quietly, and once I'm outside I put on my shoes, or the ground will hurt my feet, but I still try to walk softly. When the frost starts, every blade of grass crunches and it sounds as loud as cracks of thunder. This walking from the bed building to the kitchen building is the worst bit. I have to sneak behind the chattel pens to get to the kitchen building. We're never allowed in the chattel pens ever, so we're all scared of it. Sometimes there are low moaning noises that come from the building that you can hear when you're very close, and when I snuck out last summer as I walked past, I snapped a twig underfoot, and as soon as I did, something thudded into the wall I was next to from the other side. Kept slamming over and over, making these horrible noises as if something was throwing itself at the brick over and over again, trying to get out, to get me. Now we all know it's haunted. The other kids avoid it, but it's the fastest way to the kitchen block without being seen. So I go along it and try to ignore the noises and the ghosts. The kitchen block is always locked when we're not eating, but the window in the back in the butcher's room is broken. You can kind of lift one of the panes right out and crawl through. I'm getting a bit big for it now, but I can just about fit through still. I wiggle through the gap and climb down onto the shiny steel countertops. Once I'm in, it's easy to get to the larder. I can take all the time I want. I stopped this time though. When I was crawling through the window, I slipped and hit the knife block with my foot. and they went everywhere, and there were so many I didn't know the right place for them. The noise of metal on metal was so loud that the dogs in their kennels nearby started barking, so I rushed just to put the knives back where I thought they might be, and crawled back out as fast as I could, but it was too late. The dogs had woken everyone up and the lights were on, so I couldn't go back or they'd know it was me. They know it's me anyway. They must. I'm the only one not there. I don't want to disappear like Maria. I'm in my special place in the woods that I sometimes go to be alone. Every so often I see a light through the trees. I think they're searching for me. I don't want them to find me, and worst of all, I never did take any food. I'm so hungry. Story 9. So, I've told this story so many times, and my friends always just laugh it off and tell me I'm crazy. I was about 9 years old at the time. I'm sleeping over at my best friend's house down in his basement. At some point in the middle of the night, I wake up to the sound of someone running down the stairs to the basement. I shoot straight up off the couch we were sleeping on. My friend somehow remains asleep. When I look over to the stairs, I see a kid standing at the bottom of them. I had just woken up, so I'm wiping my eyes, making sure my eyes aren't playing tricks on me. He's still there, so I ask, "Who's there?" I get no response, and now I am horrified. He's just standing there at the bottom of the stairs. I think it may be my best friend's brother messing with us, but they look smaller, and I'm not sure, so I'm still very weary. After not receiving an answer, I ask angrily, "What do you want?" The little boy had stopped at the bottom of the stairs and not moved an inch. He looks at me right in the eyes and says, "I'm here. I'm here. I'm ready to give it my all." Very weird thing to say, I know. After hearing his voice and processing his weird response, I'm now 100% sure that this is not my friend's brother, and my friend's still sleeping on the other end of the couch. After he said, I'm here, I'm ready to give it my all," it really clicked in my 9-year-old head that this isn't a dream and I'm actually awake right now. My heart drops and I'm frozen with terror. I don't know what else to say to the kid at the bottom of the stairs, but I continue to look at him despite being absolutely frozen with fear. He stares right back at me, and after about 10 to 15 seconds, I ask him who he was again. He starts to give me a real sinister grin, and then he legitimately fades away right in front of my eyes. I lay back down under the covers and come to qualms with the fact that I'm awake. After about an hour of shitting my pants under the covers, I build up the courage to wake my friend up to go upstairs. I tell my friend and his family about it the next morning, and everyone tries to convince me that I was sleeping, but I know I was awake. A few years later, after they had moved out of that house, my friend's mom admits to having a few strange encounters in that house herself. I wish the kid had said a bit more, but at the same time, I guess I don't. 'Cause that grin that he gave me after the fear came over me has stuck with me ever since. Now at 23, I still get chills when I think about that experience. If he had paired that grin with something a little more frightening than, I'm here, I'm ready to give it my all, I probably would have had to be institutionalized. Story 10. I'm going to give a little bit of a backstory here before talking about it. So when I was around 2, me, my mom, my dad, My older sister and older brother lived in a small apartment a couple streets down from where I live now. Me and my brother were around the same age since I was only 9 months younger than him, and we both shared a room. My mom told me recently about some experiences she had in that apartment. I will list off a few she told me. The cabinets, all of them in the kitchen, would fling open at night when everybody was asleep. The only reason she ever knew about this was because my sister told her we would hear walking going up and down the stairs and by the rooms at night for some reason. The entity seemed to love going around making a mess. I'm calling it an entity because spirits is more like a living thing before, and this thing was demonic. This thing was bad, and I truly believe it somehow managed to follow us to where we live now. My mom told me she got a Bible. We still have that Bible to this day. We're not religious, so... You know it was bad when my mom was gifted a Bible, and she got it from a friend because she was telling them about this thing in the apartment. And she was reading it one night when my dad was asleep because she was afraid. And she heard the stomping of feet coming closer and closer. Like if this thing knew she was reading it and was going to stop her from doing it. She closed the book and put it down, scared out of her mind. She would tell me that I would run into her room afraid, same as my brother. I'm pretty sure my younger brother also lived there for a few months, and he would scream and cry at night from seeing or hearing something that my mom or dad couldn't see. The last thing I know of that apartment is one that scared my dad so bad that he completely erased it from his mind. So this happened on the day we were moving out. Our stuff was in a moving van getting ready to leave. My mom, my sister, and my other siblings were outside waiting for my dad to come out with the last thing. And my mom sweared she saw a big shadowy figure behind my dad as he was walking out. Told me it looked like it was trying to follow us to the new house. And that it was attached to us, but my dad looked back behind him when my mom said there's something behind him. He turned and froze in place. So scared he couldn't move, giving off such a demonic energy. He was so scared. And my dad usually doesn't get afraid, so that must have freaked him out pretty bad. I feel like it managed to attach itself to one of us because I do see a big shadow figure every once in a while. Story 11. So, I went ghost hunting last night and had an experience I will never forget. I'm a 23-year-old female and I go to college with my best friend, a 20-year-old female. We joined a local club on campus. Upon meeting the other people in our club, we soon realized that we all shared an interest in folklore and the supernatural. So we decided that club should meet up for a ghost hunting night on campus for fun. We met around 9 at night and visited a few hotspots known on campus. Well, we got a little bit of interaction. It was nothing major, mostly small EVPs and some captures on Snapchat. The group was having a blast, including my friend and I. By 11:30, our group had dwindled down to less than 6 of us. Most of the group had gone home to go to bed. It was at that point we decided to visit the most active place on campus, which is a residential hall. The residential hall is haunted by a rather famous ghost who I will call Jay. Jay was a young baker who worked at his family's bakery that had been on campus. Jay unfortunately died when he fell and got locked in the oven and burned to death. The hall is built on top of where the bakery used to be. Jay is known around the hall for pulling pranks like hiding keys and turning on radios. Our group leader, who I'll call Kay, is an RA at the building and knows all of the spots that Jay frequents. She took us inside and led us to one of the hot spots, which is a computer lab. We all took seats in different rows at the lab. Where I sat, there was nobody around me. and we were quite a few feet apart from each other. So we sit there and Kay has a spirit box app going on her phone. We start talking to Jay and tell him to move stuff around us to prove that he was there. Every time we do, the spirit box responds with no or not a good idea. I was getting bored and tired at this point, so I started egging Jay on more by telling him to knock stuff over or even mess with me. Finally, I tell Jay to open the closet, to which we get no response. Kay starts talking about how a lot of the activity relates to the closet. It was at that moment that the back of the chair is smacked hard enough that it just lets out an audible smack. It was also hard enough that it sent vibrations through my body. I scream immediately and book it to the door, and so does everybody else. We race out of the room and down the hall where we finally stop and catch our breath. I have never been so shaken in my entire life. There was no way that any of us could have smacked my chair because we were so far apart. I was also sitting completely still, and there was nothing behind me that could have fallen and hit my chair. It also felt a direct strike straight to my back. I've always believed in ghosts, but I never had an experience until last night. My friend was recording the whole thing with an audio recorder and caught the moment it happened. Needless to say, I won't be returning to that residential hall anytime soon. Story 12. I'm not sure how to go about this. It's only been a few weeks, but it's driving me crazy. I'm seeing numbers in my sleep. Numbers that don't make sense. I've reviewed the math over and over, ran through countless simulations. I'm pretty sure I broke a few laws trying to figure this out. Still, it continues to mock me, sitting smugly on that piece of paper that I stole from the lab. I'm writing this because I think I'm in danger. They're on to me, and they've been watching me for a few days now. This is my story so that the truth can get out. Bear with me. I'm not much of a storyteller, but I'll try my best. Let me start at the beginning. So, everyone remembers a few months ago when we got our first real look at photos of black holes, right? It was pretty big news at the time. At least on the news sites I visit. Pretty much a lot of radio telescopes working together in order to get a solid picture of something so far away that our minds can barely process the distance. Well, I was pretty busy during that time. You see, I work at a lab that measures radio waves from space. Now I know what you're thinking. Radio waves from space. This is some weird thing about UFOs and extraterrestrials, right? Well, no. Plenty of stuff in space emits radio waves, and we regularly use what's known as radio telescopes to measure them. These measurements can tell us all sorts of information on an object's size, composition, what direction it's moving, etc. It's actually pretty fascinating. What we do is we have radio telescopes in strategic areas around the world which we can use to measure these waves and factor in the rotation of the Earth, and which telescope received the wave to get an accurate measurement. It's a bit more complex than that, but you get the idea. Anyway, I worked at one of these labs as an intern during the time that the telescopes were being used to measure the frequency of this black hole M87. It was pretty tough work. Long days and nights of staring at data on a screen trying to make sense of it and factor it together to make a complete picture. Yeah, working with space agency sounds awesome, but it can be boring as shit sometimes. Anyway, I was just about to finish my shift when my computer alerted me to an email from my supervisor saying I got an error or my last entry and it needed to be redone. Just great, I thought. Here went my night. This means another hour or two of going through the data line by line to find the one number I copied incorrectly. I was tired and frustrated, but this was nothing new, so I relaunched the program and went back to my last entry. Well, I sat at the desk for half an hour going through the data line by line and comparing results, but it matched perfectly. That's weird, I thought. Why would the computer tell me there was an error in my result when there wasn't? I went through it again and once more after that to make sure. Sure enough, I didn't find any errors in my data entry. Well, maybe it's a problem with the computer, I thought. Maybe somehow the program was factoring these numbers together wrong. I couldn't leave with this error unresolved, so I had to do it by hand. This was going to take forever. It was around about hour 2 that I finished and noticed something was off. I had redone the math twice by now, but the result just didn't make any sense. I get what the computer meant. There was just no way the result was correct. Let me clarify. I like math. It makes sense and had to find rules that make it work. This data threw that all on its head. It's not that the number was any larger or smaller than normal. It's not that the data was any different than normal. It's that the result just didn't make sense. This was a number that shouldn't be. No, I'm not going to write it down. Not after what I know now. The more I redid the equations, the less sense they made. It's like the numbers had a mind of their own and kept trying to lead me to this result. I got frustrated and angry. Most of the team I worked with had already gone home several hours ago, and I was nearing 22 hours without sleep. So I shot off an email for my supervisor for when she comes in the next day explaining the situation. I was likely just overtired and needed sleep. I'll check it again in the morning. The next day, I woke up to a few missed calls from my supervisor. She sounded worried and asked if I could come in as soon as possible. I called her back and left a message saying that I'd be in and to just give me an hour or so to get ready. When I got to the lab, I was surprised to find that there were several men and women in suits talking with my supervisor. Another man in a similar suit was sitting at my desk going through my computer. When I walked in, I saw one of them point to me, and a man walked over and asked me to come with him. I was worried. We have some contracts with the government and pretty strict reporting that needs to get done. Leaving unfinished work is highly frowned on. This man led me to an empty office and started asking me questions. He wanted to know my name, what I did at the lab, how long I've worked there, etc. I tried to answer as best as I could, but my heart was pounding and I probably showed it as I stumbled my way through his questions. He then asked me about the entry I completed last night. He wanted to know why the data was incorrect. I tried to explain to him that according to my math and the computer, it wasn't incorrect. The numbers just didn't add up. I don't remember a lot of what he asked me after that. I must have been pretty nervous as I really don't have any good memory of it. Just that I felt that some of the questions were pretty strange. Anyway, when they were done questioning my team, they left but told us they would have to confiscate my computer to look for evidence of having been hacked. I know that was a bullshit excuse though. The computer I worked with was on a closed network. Anyone hacking it would need to have physically accessed my computer. This was getting weird. My supervisor sent me home until this mess got straightened out. I felt guilty. Our team was going to be behind due to a mistake I made. I had to make this right somehow, and I still wanted to figure this problem out, so I took the papers I had written my math by hand on yesterday and went home thinking I'd solve it and no longer be holding the rest of the team up. That afternoon, I sat at my desk at home looking over my work, mostly just staring at that number. Why didn't it make sense? What was weird about it? The math just didn't add up. No matter what I did, no matter how I formatted or manipulated the data, it always came out to that same number. The more I calculated, the more the numbers began to betray me. It was like they were hiding something from me, leading me this way and that in the wrong direction. I was obsessed with figuring this out. I barely ate or slept, and when I did, my dreams were haunted by that number, staring at me, mocking me, almost threatening me. What was wrong? This was crazy. I needed answers. Our lab has a supercomputer. Very expensive to run, but sometimes we need to use it to calculate results from thousands of data entries very quickly. I did something very illegal and snuck into the lab after hours. I worked late hours, and it wasn't too weird to see me using my ID to enter the building late at night. Technically, I didn't have access to the computer, but my supervisor gave me her password one day so I could run something for her. It took a while, but I entered the data into the computer and ran the software to calculate it. It took far longer than it should have to come up with the result. 2 hours, in fact. I was just looking at the result on the screen. That same damn number. When the smoke alarm started going off. Looking back into the room, I could see that part of the computer was smoking. I ran to grab the fire extinguisher, and by the time I got back, the smoke had turned into a sizable fire. The sprinkler system turned on, and I ran out of the building. They still say it was vandalism. Some high school prank give Ori. I know they know the truth, too. I see him outside my window. A man in a dark suit, sitting in his car watching my house. This is the 3rd night he's been there. Still no word from my supervisor or the rest of my team. All my texts and calls have gone unanswered. I think I stumbled on something big here. Something to do with that damn number. I don't know what it is, but it's not normal, and I think it's put me and my team in danger. There's something there that we're not supposed to know about. Something that someone wants to cover up about this data. The world needs to know. There's something weird about Black Hole M87. I'll keep working on it, but I may need to go off the grid for a while. Story 13. We all mourned his death, even my mom and dad. He was like the perfect son-in-law for them, always attending to their needs and whatnot. On September 5th, 2020, Bruce got hit by a truck while attempting to rescue a baby sparrow that had fallen on the road. He breathed his last breath in my arms while I screamed at him to hold on a little longer. My only wish was to see him smile at me one last time. Little did I know that my wish would come true 1 year after his death. My name is Rachel and I'm 25. My boyfriend's passing dealt a huge blow to me, and I thought I would never recover from it. It wasn't until I met Andrew, who was able to fill up that hole that had been created in my heart. He helped me through this hard phase, and I ended up marrying him on September 3rd, 2021, just 2 days before the date that marked 1 year of my old boyfriend's death. That night, at around 11 p.m., I was looking at the moon from my bedroom window, sipping a cup of tea. I was thinking how Andrew had changed my life for the better, and the thought brought a smile on my face. Took another sip and looked at the neighboring houses. Everyone had mostly gone to bed, and only the streetlights outside brought any source of light. I set the empty cup on the table and was about to go to bed when I noticed someone standing at the porch of the house, exactly opposite ours. It was pretty dark outside and I could only make out an opaque shape. I squinted my eyes to see if I could penetrate the darkness to get a better look at the person, but to no avail. I could tell that whoever it was looking directly at my bedroom window. I was feeling uneasy, so I called out to Andrew, who was busy in the study working on his project. "What is it, dear? Do you need something?" His head popped into the doorway. "Not really. There is someone standing outside the house opposite us, and he's giving these weird vibes," I said. "Must be our neighbor Frank. He usually forgets where he keeps his door keys when he goes out." "I'm not sure. The guy is facing directly towards our house." "Let me have a look," said Andrew as he made his way to the window. The guy hadn't moved since I last saw him. He was still in darkness, so making out his face was still difficult. "I'll give Frank a call to see if he is..." Andrew was cut short when a car passed by and its headlights revealed the person who was standing there. My mouth dropped open as I realized who it was. The person standing there had brown hair. He was wearing blue jeans and a black t-shirt. It was Bruce, and he had the biggest grin on his face. I took a step back, trying to process what I had seen. That was definitely Bruce standing there, but how is he alive? Rachel, didn't you say that Bruce got hit by a truck and died afterwards?" asked Andrew. His eyes still hadn't left Bruce. I was too stunned to answer. I clearly remember that I was there when he was buried. I even went to his grave several times after. "I know you won't lie to me about something like this, but that Bruce looks far from dead to me," stated Andrew. His voice wasn't angry. He sounded confused. I had shown Andrew a picture of Bruce once, so that's why he recognized him. I escaped a glance outside the window, and sure enough, Bruce was still standing there. He hadn't moved an inch. Andrew drew the curtains so that we don't have to look at Bruce's smiling face. "I'm calling the cops on him," he said as he dialed in the number. "I think we shouldn't. He's not doing anything." I somehow managed to find my voice. Andrew looked in the direction of the window and sighed. "If he continues this weird act tomorrow, then I'm letting the cops deal with him. For now, let's just get to bed." I nodded in agreement and went to bed with him. Tomorrow morning, Bruce was gone. I was relieved that he was gone. It must have been our imagination or something, because Bruce was dead and we couldn't have possibly seen him last night. Or so I thought. The day went on normally. Andrew spent the day talking to travel agents and booked us a trip to Hawaii for the 6th of September for our honeymoon. I spent most of the time packing our luggage and completely forgot the events of last night. After dinner, I went to my room to open the window to let in some fresh air. I pushed open the curtains and almost screamed. Bruce was standing next to our fence, directly under a street light. He had moved from yesterday's position and was much closer to our house now. Just like yesterday, he had a giant smile on his face. He stood there, never blinking an eye. I shouted and called for Andrew. He came running in, and seeing Bruce from the window, he quickly took out his phone. "That's it, you creep. I'm calling the cops." I stepped away from the window, my heart racing now. A few minutes later, we heard the doorbell. It was the cops. Andrew explained to them about Bruce and them both to where Bruce was standing. I watched all of this from the window. "Officer, I would like you to arrest this creep. He has been stalking us since yesterday," said Andrew, who pointed at Bruce. The police officers looked in the direction of Bruce. having a confused expression on their face. "Look, son, are you trying to pull a prank on us? You do know such things could get you in real trouble," stated one of the policemen. "If not, then I suggest you stop drinking at this hour. It causes your mind to go bananas, so you imagine stuff," said the other. I stared in horror. What do they mean by that? Don't they see Bruce standing right next to them? Andrew was just as confused as I was. "Officer, the man I'm talking about is right next to you. Arrest him." "Look, son, I already told you that such pranks are no good. If you wanted to make us waste our time, then at least make up something good," warned the policeman. "Let's get moving, Drew. Kids these days," said the other. Both officers went back to their car and drove away. The most frightening part of this entire exchange was that Bruce hadn't moved an inch during it. He kept his eyes towards me, completely disregarding what was going on around him. He had a giant smile on his face throughout. "Look here, if you come to my house again, you'll regret it," warned Andrew. Bruce once again acted as he hadn't heard a thing, kept his gaze fixed on me. Andrew came back inside in complete disbelief. I have no idea what's going on. Why did the officers think I was going crazy when Bruce was right in front of them? Andrew kept on mumbling. I drew the curtains, taking one last look outside. Bruce was standing exactly where he was, smiling. Night went and morning came. Today was the day when Bruce had died, exactly a year ago. Due to the recent events, I was scared to go and visit his grave. Me and Andrew discussed about last night's events, that how the police officers completely ignored Bruce like he wasn't even there. We came up with no logical explanation for it, so gave up. We finished packing for our honeymoon after that. That night, I was terrified to even go near the window. We made sure all the windows and doors were locked. Andrew went outside the room to recheck the door locks. I was a bit curious, so I went to the window to get a peek outside. I lifted the curtain and screamed. Bruce was standing directly outside the window, smiling. Andrew came running in and pulled me away from the window. I was shaking terribly at this point. My scream must have been really loud because a few neighbors came over to check in on us. We told them about Bruce and his weird smiling. They went to check that area, and to our utter shock, they too completely ignored Bruce, who was standing in plain sight. It seemed like only me and Andrew were able to see him. Once again, Bruce showed no interest in the people around him and kept his gaze at the window. The neighbors went back after a few minutes. They must have thought we were going crazy. That night, we hardly slept. We had no idea if Bruce would try anything since he was directly outside our house. Both of us kept watch. Morning came by slowly. Andrew parted the curtain and Bruce was gone by that time. We had our flight in a few hours, so we made our way to the airport. Both me and Andrew were super sleepy, so we decided to sleep on the plane. We boarded the plane and found our seats. Let's start our new life from this moment onwards. The last few days were weird and I want to leave that behind, said Andrew. I nodded in agreement. Satisfied, Andrew took out an eye mask and quickly dozed off. I was surprised by Andrew's ability to sleep so quickly. The plane was about to take off. I took one last look outside the window and felt like my heart stopped. Standing next to the ground marshal was Bruce, and he was smiling. Story 14. A few years ago, there was an entity or a shadow person haunting my girlfriend's apartment, her mom's apartment, and a friend of ours across the parking lot's apartment. It would haunt all three places. At night, we would look across the parking lot and see a shadow figure standing in the window. We would call our neighbor on the phone and she would check it out and see nothing in the window, but we can still see it standing there. When it would haunt Jenny's apartment, my ex-girlfriend, it would be a flash of black across the wall like it was running from room to room. This was the time I was meditating a lot and trying to have an outer body experience. Eventually, I get my wish. Twice. Coming face to face with a demon, but that will be in another time I tell you that experience of mine. I lived about 6 miles away from my girlfriend's apartment. Me and Jenny's attitudes were changing frequently. Always arguing, obviously making this creature stronger. It's at nighttime, me and Jenny are in bed with her little toy poodle named Fancy sleeping. Next thing I know, I wake up and the back of my head and neck gets really stiff. It starts to vibrate and shake and my head lifts up without my control. Jenny feels this and she sees it. It frightens her. She just holds me and tells me it's going to be okay over and over until it stopped. I hold her and tell her I'm okay. What are you doing? She says my head was shaking. I thought you were having a seizure. I told her no, everything's fine. Go back to sleep. I knew everything was not all right. I didn't know what that was. A few nights go by and I'm at my house on the phone with Jenny and out of nowhere we start to argue again over nothing. I feel like this creature was purposely making us fight. But anyway, I get off the phone with her. Things change for the worse here. The back of my head and neck starts to get stiff and vibrate again uncontrollably. My head tilted to the side, all stiff. I can't control it. Next thing I know, my vision blurs and my eyesight gets pushed back like I zoom out into a deep tunnel. I see this black mist coming towards me. It goes inside of me and I can feel this creature everywhere, but the worst part of it all is that I cannot control my body. I storm out of my house into the night. This thing controlling my body. I'm panicking on the inside. I know every intention this creature wants to do. It wants to go to Jenny's apartment and murder her, basically. It's pitch black outside. I live in the country. There's woods everywhere. This creature is forcing me to walk this road in the middle of the night towards my girlfriend's apartment. I can feel his thoughts, his emotions. It's horrible. Now, what gets worse is that the entire time my body and I'm getting closer to the apartment, the more animalish he acts. I'm terrified. I'm stuck inside my own body. He starts speaking in tongue, a language I have never heard before, while slobbering and spitting all over the place and growling out of my own mouth. Almost each car that passed by me slowed down close enough to see, then they would race down the road trying to get away from me. By their reactions, it frightened me more. I believe these people driving by also saw my eyes were completely black and slobbering like a rabid dog. I'm walking closer and closer to her place, trying to gain control over my body, but it's not working. As I am walking down the road, I listen to him talk. It's not my voice. It is not a language on this earth. I'm panicking more and more because we are close, about 200 yards from her place. I'm begging for somebody to help me. I walk past the cowboy church. Maybe Pastor Zach can help me if he sees me. I walk by the church, but nobody's there. Another church about 50 more yards up ahead on the left, people are there. It's open. I could hear them congregating and worshiping Jesus. I know miracles in Jesus do exist because the second I walk past the parking lot of that second church, I can feel this creature get ripped out of me. It takes all the air out of my lungs. I fall to the ground on my knees, gasping for air. I vomit. After I collect myself, I look around. I look ahead and realize I was about 80 yards from Jenny's apartment. I start to cry, bawling my eyes out, almost puking again. I can't believe what almost just happened. I can't believe I was possessed. I turn around and run the whole 6 miles back to my house crying. This is a true story and it haunts me to this day. I've never told Jenny. I don't think I will.